We all have that special item that's passed down through generations. A piece of jewelry, jackets, photographs. But not everything we inherit can be seen or touched. We also inherit values, beliefs, and stories about who we are and how the world works. Some of us accept them, while others start to question and unlearn. And our guest today is very familiar with this process. Join us as we sit down with Becca, who not only went through this process, but has dedicated their life since to educate others. I'm your host, Amira.
And I'm your host, Ibrahim.
And this is UTTN, the podcast.
Ahla wa sahla, everybody. Welcome back to our listeners, and welcome to anybody who's new today. And we're very excited for another episode of UTTN, where we have a very special guest today with us, Becca. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I think this episode struck a lot of conversations between you and I, Amira, about how to unravel this conversation, where this conversation can go. It could go to so many directions with all the things that you do.
We honestly don't know what to expect. What is actually going to be brought up.
That's actually when I was driving here in the car, I also was like, what are we going to talk about today? There's so many things to talk about. So we'll find out.
You, us, and our listeners are all going to be surprised together.
Yeah.
The way that we are doing this season of UTTN is that we're splitting it into 3 segments. And we're going to start with the first one, where we try to understand who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do in our first segment is we're going to ask you who you are. And we're going to ask you that question 3 times in a row. And each time we're going to ask you to answer with only one word. Who is Becca? And after you answer us 3 times, we'll unravel all the 3 words together.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Let's do it. So let's start our first segment. Who are you? So Becca, let me ask you, who is Becca?
I am Becca, and I am Israeli-American.
Israeli-American. Can we count that as one word?
There's a dash in the
There's a dash.
There's a dash.
We'll accept it.
We'll make it all right, we'll slip. We'll let it slip. I'll ask you again. Who is Becca?
I am queer.
Queer. And for the last time, who is Becca?
I'm an organizer.
An organizer. Okay, so American Israeli queer organizer. It sounds like a title.
I like there's new words.
And also there are new words that we haven't had in previous episodes. So let's start by unraveling all the 3. Let me ask you first, was there a specific reason for the sequence? Or it just came up?
I guess it just kind of came up. Probably if we weren't recording like this podcast specifically, I would have maybe said different. Some of the words would have maybe been different.
Exactly. There's something that we tell.
I'm not sure that I actively think of myself as Israeli American like on a daily basis.
Okay.
But obviously politically in this conversation, I think it's important to place myself within the greater context. Organizer and queer, I think I probably would say regardless.
Okay.
And honestly, it's something that we've discussed in previous episodes, and we try to remind our listeners all the time, is that, the guests that we bring are not limited to 3 words.
Right.
They're much more than 3 words, but these are 3 words that they right now are choosing to share with our audience. There's so many other layers of each of us, but these are the layers that we're here to unravel and to bring to the guests, to the audience.
I also want to say that I feel like it's a lot of our listeners are like half something, half something, and the American mix comes in. I just want to say that the majority of Palestinians, and dare I say also the majority of Israelis, aren't that. Like they're not just the people. The guests that we're bringing aren't like their like citizenship status isn't representative of the entire peoplehoods. But because we started this podcast in English, we are continuing it in English, and we tried as best as we can to bring a diverse group of people, specifically the Palestinians, but the language will still be like a tied thing that like we need someone to convey the message as well.
Yeah.
So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, no, I also think in general, like the assumptions of how much citizenship people here hold is often very assumed as opposed to accurate.
And versus their identity and how they perceive themselves.
Yeah.
So let's start with your identity as an American Israeli. What does that mean to be an American Israeli? Where were you born? Were you born here or in the States? Or
I was born in the States, and if I could redo my word, actually, now that I'm thinking about it more, I'd probably say Jerusalemite, but I'll stick with Israeli American.
Got another one.
Because I was born and raised in Philadelphia.
Philly.
Yeah, city of brotherly love. But my family, half of my family is from Jerusalem. My grandmother is a Jerusalemite. Her family has been in Jerusalem since few hundred years. So part of what's called like the old Yeshuv. And Jerusalem is a very, very big part of my identity that I had growing up, even though I grew up in Philadelphia. I often say that I grew up with a Jerusalem identity in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of meant growing up on stories of what it was like. My grandmother was one of 12 children, and she was the youngest. So a lot of it was kind of growing up on stories of their lives in Jerusalem. When she was a child in kind of like the 1920s and 30s mainly, and also kind of the political aspects to it. When I ended up moving to Israel, which is when I was 18 in 2007, so I've now spent half of my life here. It was a big part of it was this kind of like pull towards Jerusalem, and not necessarily Jerusalem as a religious concept, but more as like, this is part of my family's history, and this is where my family has been for a very long time. And so this is part of my story. And when I was 17, I spent time in the country and really was getting to know my cousins at that point and really wanted to kind of like reunite with them and be a part of their story. And also my family moved to Jerusalem before Zionism. I mean, like Zionism wasn't quite a concept yet when they moved to Jerusalem. From Vilna, which I think at the time was part of Poland, but today is part of Lithuania. Vilnius is what it's called today. And this rabbi called the Gaon of Vilna basically was like, go to Jerusalem for religious reasons. And a bunch of his followers were like, yeah. And then in 1809, my family ended up in Jerusalem. They basically came through Europe, spent like a year or two in Tzfat, and then ended up in Jerusalem, as far as I know the story. And my family, which is the Rivlin family, was like one of the first Ashkenazi families, at least, to move outside of like the old walls of Jerusalem and to settle like areas like Nachalat Shiva and Rehavia. And I still have a lot of family members who live there. And so Jerusalem identity is really core to my family. But also my family became very active in pre-state nationalism, to my understanding, following the riots in 1929. There's also like a chunk of my family who's like, or like a branch of my family who's not, I'm not descended from them directly, but they were Rivlins who lived in Hebron. And so the 1929 like massacre was obviously like, my family was very affected by it. And then they joined like the Etzel and the Lehi, like the really, I mean, all of the pre-state militias were violent. You can't be a non-violent militia. But they joined the very ideologically purposeful violence, big followers of Jabotinsky. And so I like grew up on stories of how like members of my family planned the bombing of the King David Hotel. Didn't carry it out, but like helped some of like the planning of it, and like grew up even with some like readings from Jabotinsky, and those were like things in my life. And it was very different. And then I say though, Israeli American, even though like my grandmother actually moved, she was sent to New York to live with her sister in something like 1946 or 1947, when things were already obviously quite things were really bubbling on the surface. It was very clear that that there was going to be harder violence. And I've heard two stories and I don't know which is accurate. The first is that my grandmother was dating a British soldier, which was like a huge no, obviously, in my family. But the second, and I think the one that's accurate, is that she was dating a soldier from the Palmach, which was like the other pre-state militia that was considered not as hardcore. And they were like, that's not hardcore enough for us. Go live with your sister. And then my dad was born in New York 2 months later. But like we've always just then been back and forth like to Jerusalem. And so, but then like the American Jewish side of it is that I grew up in like, this really progressive Judaism in Philadelphia that was teaching things like tikkun olam, which means like repair the earth, and kind of like social justice. And the synagogue that I grew up in Philadelphia is this huge synagogue in the city. And it like went through a process of, when the synagogue was founded, it was a very Jewish neighborhood, but today it's a very Black neighborhood. And so there was a lot of kind of civil, I don't know if civil rights is the right word, but kind of like racial like connections and work that was being done in the synagogue from the moment that I was a small child, or like from the moment I remember it was probably happening before. And so that also really painted for me what Judaism can and should be, and like in a way that I connected with it, of trying to be local to where the synagogue was and where we were living and within the context of where we were living. And so when I moved to Israel, I think that I had these very different ideas politically between kind of like my family was like Jabotinsky followers, and on the other side kind of like concepts of like fixing the earth and justice, and kind of, not just the mitzvot, not just the commandments that you like do as, like with God, but commandments that you do to try and better the world. And so when I moved to Israel and joined the army, I didn't quite see the tension there. And then once I was in the army, that became, and especially when I was in the West Bank, but not exclusively, that became very apparent to me.
So you joined, you moved at the age of 18 to join the army.
Yeah, you could say that. I think that I moved more to like be close to my family, and
this is kind of like part of the duties that you need to pay.
And it's like
when you come in, okay, this is what I need to pay the society.
Yeah, but what is definitely true is I wasn't critical of the idea of joining the army. I wanted to join the army. I also think, obviously today I'm very critical of what the army does, but at the time I think that I was very critical of U.S. politics and how individualistic it was. And so for me, joining the army, as opposed to kind of like spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that like me and my family didn't have to get a university education, joining the army seemed like this way to be collectively involved in what at the time, obviously, I thought was going to help the greater good, or that was mainly like defending my relatives in Jerusalem and in other places. And so, so I definitely like joined the army both uncritically and was excited to, but I mainly moved here to kind of like just continue my family's like story or connect with that part. It just was always a part of me, and I think I felt like I couldn't fully realize it without being here. And so I came here, and so even now I don't live in Jerusalem, but like being a Jerusalemite is a huge part of my family identity.
I think it's a good time to ask about the second question, the second term that you used, identifying as a queer.
Identifying as queer, yeah.
And, particularly in our society, it's not it's something that's still, I think, new in general.
I think you got to identify. What do you mean by our society?
Like in general, even in the broader Middle East, in Israel, in Palestinian society, in Arab society, like it's in this area.
I would also add, like with the rise of the far right all over the world, like it's not.
It's a challenging time to be a queer anywhere. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I like actually like ended up coming out when I like basically like around the same time that I left the army.
Okay.
And I think it's because it was the first time that I just like had some of my own like experience. I wasn't in a framework. I'm one of those people that like today I'm very critical of a lot of frameworks that I participated in, but while I was participating in them was trying to succeed within those frameworks best I could. And I think that made it very hard for me to question my own identity. And then the second I left, it kind of was like, oh, here we are, here I am. And today it's funny kind of like to almost like use it as a definition, because it's actually not something that I really think about on a daily basis. Like I like forget sometimes that it just not everyone's queer. Not in the sense.
A nice world to live in.
And also we have a friend with a theory that everybody is a little bit queer on some spectrum or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think
and that person is sitting behind the cameras right now.
I think it is one of those things where it's like there's obviously like a gender identity and a sexual identity, but I think it's mainly just kind of like, you know, how you fit into the world and a social political identity. And once I kind of came out, which was like in my early 20s, it just became something that became a default in my life, right? Like I don't ever come out. That would be insane. That's
You're not holding a poster and walking around. Guys, this is not what happens.
No, and also no one. Like, I mean, I think it's been a very long time since anyone assumed that I was straight, but like, it's not something that comes up. Like, it feels like a very obvious part of my life. And a few years ago also, I realized I'm non-binary, and that had a moment of kind of being like a new discovery. And now it's just something that it's like, duh, of course I'm non-binary, even though like, that actually you do kind of have to remind people. But yeah, it just kind of is like a default of who I am. But why I think it's relevant to my identity is because even though it's just a default of who I am, and it's not necessarily something that I really don't actually I don't necessarily talk about it that much. It's not really part of my organizing. It's not part of my activism, but it was part of my early activism. Like the first way that I saw myself as an activist was as an LGBTQ activist in Israel. I volunteered at this place called the Bal Noal, which was in Tel Aviv. And I started volunteering there in 2011. And in 2009, there had been a shooting there, and it was like a youth bar. It was like a youth LGBT bar. It wasn't a real bar. There was no alcohol, just to clarify for everyone. And in that shooting, one counselor and one of the participants were murdered, and a bunch of other people were left seriously harmed. And I wasn't there for that. I was still in the army at the time. But when I started volunteering there, even though my idea of volunteering there was to work with the youth specifically and try and give support there, you don't really stop there. Then all of a sudden, we started realizing like how underfunded we were, and at the same time, like how much money was going to campaigns for Pride in Tel Aviv, and kind of like seeing that huge gap, and how some of the people who were harmed in that attack were left in wheelchairs, and the state basically never declared it a hate crime. And so
what attack by who was it?
They don't know. That's why they've never called it a hate crime, because someone walked in and he was masked, and he basically like shot the place up, and it was incredibly traumatic. Also, like people were getting outed like on live TV, basically. Like these were youth, like these were like high schoolers. Like some of their parents like didn't know that they were part of the LGBTQ community. And because they never found the perpetrator, they refused to call it a hate crime, because they're like, we don't know what his intent was, right? Which, as being part of the community that, like, I wasn't obviously personally a victim of it, but being part of the community that was affected by it, to think of it as anything other than a hate crime seems pretty insane. And what it means practically is there's still people to this day who were there who aren't getting any support by the state that they would if it had been a hate crime.
Insane.
I think it's also frustrating because we know that the human power to look for a suspect of something else accused of like terrorism or accused
Right.
of like will be found.
Yeah.
Will be found. We'll put
Exactly.
so much resources to find that person.
Just like murders among
Exactly.
Palestinian
Right,
citizens of Israel.
exactly.
If
It's
they
like when
really wanted to,
they could find them,
they
right?
could find them.
That's exactly what I think, and that's where I kind of felt like obviously I'm Jewish, I have Israeli citizenship. Like I'm incredibly privileged, like in this land between the river to the sea, and I think though that was a moment that really politicized me of kind of then taking a look around.
When you are a minority, what happens to you? When you're not
kind
part
of
of the
seeing
big
like
group.
when you're not part of the when you're not part of the majority, how does the state actually treat you? And so for me, that was really like central, I think, to my kind of like becoming a more political member of society. And also it was around like I moved here officially, joined the army. And so this was like my first kind of chunk of time as a student. I was living in Tel Aviv. It was my first chunk of time as a civilian and as like, not someone in the army. And so that kind of like political process was really, it was really important to me. And I don't think I'd be where I am today in terms of my political organizing that has really nothing to do with that on the surface of it, but deep down, I think, really taught me a lot of how the structures work in society and in the country. And it's interesting because I do think that like overall, I actually find at least Jewish Israeli society to be relatively accepting of LGBTQ people, but there's a range. Like it's different if you're trans, it's definitely different if you're a trans woman. Like, but
and
like
geographically different.
And geographically
if you're in the center,
different.
It's not going to be the same as some rural areas in the far north or in the far south,
or
like,
even Jerusalem, like
Jerusalem,
like
certain neighborhoods.
Yeah,
but even in the center, like it depends on the location.
It really depends. It really depends. Like, but I think it's not like I feel relatively I feel comfortable living my life, and sometimes things have happened, but like.
I find it interesting that you said that that you don't find it within the third word that you used, which is an organizer, because I do think that there's a difference between the right and left here and the right and left globally.
Yeah.
Because like the right and left here, if you're Israeli and want to ignore the occupation and want to ignore everything, you can say, okay, then like the right is more conservative and the left is more liberal.
But Israeli fascists love gays.
Exactly. And like the mix.
You guys heard it here first.
The mix between like there's a blurred line between like liberalism, conservatism, and also like opposing the occupation. Et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I would say that there's a big chunk of like part of the reason why I don't even know what to call it anymore, and I don't like using the word left to describe what like people like us do. I don't like describing like peace activists, the people that want to end the occupation and the anti-occupation people.
Yeah.
For a very, very like a lot of people that I meet are either queer, liberal, sometimes even like anti-religion.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are the kinds of people, and that's part of the reason why we're so weak.
Right.
Because it's the first jab, and a lot of women. So it's the first jab to
and from divorced families.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's a lot, like even before you bring your politics to the table, who you are as an individual and a human being is already a target. So then you bring what you believe in or what you want to protest for or whatever, then you're already like jumping on one foot.
I think that probably part of it is that when I do, and obviously we'll talk more about it, but like a lot of first of all, when I do like, organizing or anything, I obviously come as my full self. Right. But I think that there's a level in which you're doing organizing that is often based in solidarity or not even just exclusively solidarity. I think a lot of like the anti-occupation, anti-apartheid work that I do obviously benefits also benefits Jewish Israelis. I mean, there is a level of selfishness to it that I really think it's not healthy for us. It's not bringing us safety. It's not good for our future. But still, I think that there's something where I feel like I have a choice to be an activist and to put my body on the line to be present in the West Bank, to do education on these things, and who I am in terms of like my, like as a queer identity and my gender and sexuality, it just is who I am. And so I don't have a choice in it. And so I think that on one hand, I find that very powerful, and I'm very content with who I am. And also, I think it's very easy to fight for rights that you don't have. Which is not to say that everyone does. I mean, a lot of people don't have certain rights and don't necessarily fight for them, right? Like we live in a world with a lot of passivity. But I think that I felt when I kind of transitioned from the world of like LGBTQ activism to more anti-occupation and anti-apartheid activism, part of my reason for doing so was seeing this huge vacuum of organizing against the occupation and feeling like there was a lot of activism in the LGBTQ world in Israel. And I kind of was like, you guys got it. Like, you don't really need me. Like, you're fine without me. And it's not that I think I'm like, it's not that I think that I'm I don't mean it to say that I think that I'm like, super crucial in the anti-occupation world or to give my.
But you are filling a gap.
But I think
you're not filling in the.
Yeah, I think there's just a larger gap that we all need, that many of us need to fill. And I think also over the years, you're right that a lot of people in the anti-occupation movement are queer. But I think there's also a level there then where our values also clearly talk about equality and justice past just how it affects us particularly. And I think that I found over the years, even though I still feel really close to the queer community in Israel, that being part of the LGBTQ community as an Israeli doesn't inherently mean that you actually want equality for everyone, right? And which is interesting because the Israeli right in the end of the day will target both groups, right?
Yeah.
But that divide and conquer works.
It's like how a lot of like Republicans will use a lot of like gay or lesbian people that are anti-trans to justify like transphobia or hate towards non-binary people. There's like, oh, this is a good gay person and like it's fine. But at the end of the day, we know that they're also against the person that they're tokenizing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that you see a lot of that. And so I just found that like over time as my politics developed and grew, that the community that I feel most connected to is the community that's kind of opened their eyes to the realities between the river to the sea. And obviously that includes, like LGBTQ identity and persecution and silencing and harm, but not necessarily just exclusively. But I do think it's really, really interesting. And obviously it's very interconnected that you have like the political party Noam, that is very much like a very strong settler movement coming out of places like Hebron, like the heart of the settler movement. And then their whole entire platform is basically anti-LGBT. And so obviously those things are connected. And I think that if we want if I'm going to have real safety, I need to be fighting for both of those things.
Yeah, but you still have. We don't have numbers, but I'll just say I've encountered not once people from the LGBTQ community in Israel who are very, very strong Likud voters.
Oh, sure.
Netanyahu voters, like the right, like it's just like what we're talking about, like the right and left. It's not here, especially. It is very much not exclusive in the sense of, your politics is defined by your sexual identity or something like that. Like I met so many people who are BB voters, even people who still like close to Judaism on a religious level.
Yeah.
Who are in part of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. I actually don't really think that there's like I think there's no issue with like identifying as LGBTQ.
Like it's not a direct...
And being religious.
Yeah, it's not a direct correlation.
Yeah, I don't think there's a direct correlation, and I think like, there are certain ways in which I'm not incredibly religious, but in which I'm in which I practice. And I think like there, the main tension, as with a lot of things, comes from how society views it and how accepted it is, and not actually the relationship to the religion or to God or to anything like that. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but it definitely is an identity that while I don't really think about it on a daily basis, it just is. It's just the default, but that obviously has had a large influence on who I am as a person and as an organizer today.
Any questions about the organizer part, or do we want to move it to the next segment?
I would just add I don't know, like a part of me from this conversation feels a bit like I don't talk about gender issues, not on my platform. We didn't mention it that much, and I think at all maybe in the first season. And I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. One, because real quickly, one is because of the tokenization of people saying, oh, you even if without queerness, just not being a hijabi woman and not being Christian is if you lived anywhere else, you couldn't dress that way, you couldn't whatever, even though I wear what I wear. Here, I can go to Bejela and Ramallah. There are conservative places and you respect the people the same way as in Israel proper. The other thing is from our community, there's a lot of homophobia. There's a lot of we need to work on that on that aspect. A lot of also the fact that the majority of the guests that we have are women. There's a lot of things that maybe we are doing that is might be uncomfortable for a lot of people. And the last is also maybe slipping up in front of Americans or people that live in countries where they have gotten to a point where it's normal to be what you are, and expect also others to abide by what you are as well. And I also a lot of queer Palestinians put that I know the term is in the closet, but for a lot of queer Palestinians, it's in the grave, and it will stay in the grave until you die. And for the three reasons that I mentioned: the tokenization, the own community, all that stuff. So I really appreciate you
we're
sharing
opening this topic.
Yeah. Also us opening this conversation. Even if it's kind of a positive uncomfortable, but I'm really happy we're talking about it.
Okay, so I just want to say one more thing on that point, is that a lot of times there's been a lot of conversation, both towards me specifically and towards other people, when engaging in organizing, trying to end the occupation, and especially in the West Bank. A lot of the places where I do work and where a lot of other people do work are quite conservative, right? Hebron is a pretty conservative city. Yeah. The South Hebron Hills, especially, it's more rural. It's very conservative. And there's always these conversations of how much of yourself do you bring? And I'm really kind of always, I'm not towing a line. I'm bringing myself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to go into the middle of the Palestinian village of Susia, where I've spent a lot of time, and kiss my spouse, right? I'm obviously not going to do that in the same way that I wouldn't do that in a lot of places that are mainly ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, because of respect. I'm not going to do that. But I'm also not going to, if anyone asks me or if it comes up, I'm not denying who I am. I'm not acting like I'm someone else. I'm not, not talking about my life. And I think that's really important also in terms of organizing, is you can have meaningful relationships with people organizing. And I would say that often there's huge gaps between, cultural gaps between me and some of the guys that I'm working with, right? And a lot of the Palestinians who I personally organize with are men.
Yeah.
Are Palestinian men. And so there can be huge gaps. And at some point I just said, I'm not gonna not talk about who I am to make you more comfortable. I'm here, and I'm gonna do anything you ask for me to do in solidarity. I mean, obviously maybe not anything, but more or less I'm here to be
I'm with you in solidarity.
No, not even I'm not even here to do solidarity. Let's be co-conspirators. I'm not just here for allyship. We have the same goal. We want to end the occupation. And we can work together, but I'm not going to bring my half self. And like, you can decide if you want to work with me, right? And I've taken that burden off of myself.
And how has it been received?
It's been received fine.
Great.
It's never been an issue. Again, I don't mean like to the point where being like culturally disrespectful, right? But I think it's something that people think that in order to be doing good organizing or solidarity work, you have to turn off parts of who you are. And I don't think that makes sense. Like we are trying to build a world that we actually want to live in. I'm not going to cut off part of myself, because then it's a world that I don't want to live in, right? And people can choose if they want the solidarity from me and from others or not, right?
I think it's so much needed. Because one, it's kind of like you're excused, or you're allowed to be the exception that whoever that person is that is uncomfortable with part of your identity. And then you're put into, we're going to get in what you do in a second, but the education part of it, like without you knowing, you're also educating and kind of like deepening that hole in the wall for like queer Palestinians to have that conversation. I remember we were once in بيت جالة المخرور, when there was like a tent and a place where we were camping, resisting the settlers that were kicking, that were taking over and kicking Palestinian families from the house. And there was like from one of like the families, there was like a comment, and then we had to like take her aside and tell her that, like, just so you know, the majority of the people that show up for you are actually in the community that you're speaking against. And then questions came up, and there was like a conversation with like by like other like queer Palestinians that were having that conversation. So like, even if you put that part of your identity or you don't talk about it, your presence alone kind of creates some sort of thought.
Yeah, it makes it more present, you know. And now I think like I started doing that years ago, and now I have a 9-month-old son, and my partner gave birth to him, right? So it's kind of like, it would be like, it's literally unavoidable. Like, I can't be who I am without, you know, being able to mention those aspects of my life. And I think that it's one of those things where people want like by being people, I think, tend to try and think that it's like just being thoughtful, but like we can always show up as who we are, you know, like we're people in this world, we deserve like dignity and grace, and we can show up as we are, and kind of like even in that situation, like I don't know how they dealt with it, but they can choose to they can choose what to do with it, you know?
And just like you said, when you respect the culture, I think it's a very Palestinian thing. Like, if you show me that you respect me, I'll accept you as you are, as long as you keep that boundary there. I have no problem with you. And there's a conception among the international community, and even among other Arabs, that we're more conservative, that we're more religious than we are as Palestinian people.
Yeah.
It's a conservative community and has religious groups, but it's not such a religious overall community. We would like to take a moment and to thank our Patreon community. Without your support, UTTN would not be able to shed light on the things we are presenting and the activism on the ground. Your support means the world to us. So if you're not a subscriber, join us on patreon.com/thirdnarrative, and you'll be able to access some exclusive content that we will have there, as well as monthly Zoom sessions with us. So join now and be part of the community.
Now we're going to move to the second segment, which is where we ask our guests, what do you do? So I'd like to hear from you briefly in one sentence. What do you do? Because I want to ask you why. Because we didn't get to it in the first segment,
Right.
but I want to ask you, because you mentioned the army, you mentioned what your grew up on Jabotinsky, and like what the beliefs that you grew up on. I want to say like how you got there.
Okay, so what I do is that I'm an educator and an organizer, working with Israelis and Jewish diaspora mainly, not exclusively, trying to end Israeli occupation and apartheid.
And let's start with the obvious, the army. What did you do in the army?
In the army, I was a shooting instructor, and I taught infantry soldiers how to use the basic, how to do riflery. So I would teach like the M16, the M4, the Tavor, the light machine gun, which is called a Negev, and a heavy machine gun. And every week, for the most part, we would get a new group of soldiers. And I specifically tended to focus on sharpshooting, which is like shooting to slightly farther distances, but not a sniper.
Mm-hmm.
Like more like 300 meters, not like 2 kilometers, right? And so I would basically teach infantry soldiers how to use their guns. That was my main job in the army. And then a couple times I was sent to like the West Bank to do guard duty.
For our listeners, if you want a more in-depth storytelling of Becca's journey to where they got to where they are now, I really highly recommend the Disillusioned podcast. We'll link it in the description. But I will admit that I couldn't finish it. It was really hard to listen to.
What part did you get to? Do you remember?
I
What
made
was
the
your
hour.
trigger?
I made the hour. No, I didn't stop as soon as I was
As soon
triggered.
as you got your
but
trigger.
like, I didn't stop. No, I continued. But then I was like, okay, I think I'm exhausted. I've got enough. Because I know Becca from Instagram. You didn't mention, but you also have Becca Explains the Occupation, which is a social media platform where you explain a lot of things to people that either have questions or are misinformed. So that's where I know you from.
Right.
And then when I hear about the past, it did trigger me.
Yeah.
Even though I know what you do now, I know that we align on so many things and probably disagree on so many things, but I know that we are walking towards the same goal together. At the same time, it got me so mad.
Yeah.
It got me really angry. Still, I'm telling people to go listen to it.
No, definitely. I also think I mean, I did some messed up stuff. You know, I recognize it. I take responsibility for it. And also recognizing it and taking responsibility is not, you can't undo your actions, you know? You can't do something that you look back on and say, that's not really okay, that's not really moral, and then somehow make it disappear from the world. I can't undo the effects that I already did. And that's one of the reasons I think why once I realized the immorality of the occupation and kind of just like the daily control over Palestinian lives, that it became so clear to me that I have to be really, really active to try and end it, because I was active on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. And, and obviously I didn't, I don't even think, I think the crazy thing is like, my position in the army was, relatively light compared to combatants and to people going into Palestinian homes, and obviously anyone going into Gaza right now. But even not right now, like even 2 decades ago, just patrolling in Palestinian towns, and yet it's still incredibly significant because everybody participating in this system, myself included, are contributing to how Palestinian lives are controlled.
So what was your aha moment?
I'm not sure that I had one aha moment. I think I had a few. I think that, and I won't go into detail, but I talk a little bit about both of these in the Disillusioned podcast, I think. But one of them is just kind of like guarding a settlement and kind of realizing that the person giving me commands is not even my military commander, but is a settler who's in charge of the security of the settlement, but they're not really thinking about the security of the settlement. They're thinking about how to expand their settlement. And so they just drew a line, as far as the eye can see, they just drew a line in the view and was like, if any Arab passes this line, you have to go down and arrest them. And that line was clearly in the fields of the next, of the Palestinian village nearby. And you kind of realize that that you're carrying out a political mission. I thought at the moment, wow, I'm really carrying out a political mission at this point. And I didn't have a full understanding of settlements and of the West Bank. And, today I know very clearly that the West Bank is run by the Israeli military, but I don't even think I really fully gauged that at the moment. But I also understood kind of like the gap between what I thought I would be doing in the army, which was kind of some like basic, vague idea of defense, to really carrying out telling Palestinians where they could and couldn't go. That was one thing. That was pretty early on in my army service. So like, none of this was really like jumping out at me until the very end. So I think the other main thing was, obviously I was a shooting instructor, so I would spend a lot of time in shooting ranges. And one of the things you realize, or that I realized, I don't think most people realize it, is that when you're in a shooting range, you're basically preparing, you're not just teaching soldiers how to shoot, right? Which, fine, it's an army, like soldiers learn how to shoot. But in this context, soldiers learn how to shoot, and then they go into the West Bank and end up patrolling and basically policing Palestinians, right? You're not actually just training for a war, for like a classic, like, let's go take over this hill type war. And so a lot of the dehumanization that I think makes it possible to police Palestinians, to go into their homes in the middle of the night and to stop people at checkposts and at checkpoints and stop and frisk and, all that, like basically constantly have this idea of making your presence felt as the army towards Palestinians in the West Bank. So they're too afraid to lift their heads up. I think a lot of that you learn in places like the shooting range, And so we would wear, and at the time we thought it was so cool, but it wasn't really about our comfort. Like we would get to wear half military uniforms and we'd be like, this is so cool, it's so comfortable, and we get cool shirts. But the shirts like were incredibly dehumanizing. You'd have one that says like one shot, one kill, and it would be, you could see like a target and then a person like falling down, having clearly been shot on it. Or another one that said like, every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you,
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and these are like really common, and it was one of those things where like it would be passed down from like shooting instructor to shooting instructor. So it was like when someone got out of the army and chose to give you their shirts, it was like a big deal, So there's obviously this like element of it of kind of like, in Hebrew you say like wasach, which I guess is probably an Arabic word.
Wasach is dirt.
Yeah, it's like dirt, but it means like, it's like, it means like cool stuff, and kind of realize like, it wasn't just the shirts. Inside the shooting range, at least like the ones that I was in, you say fire all the time, and then you shoot towards
a target.
Targets, right? And a lot of these targets are these cardboard like cutouts of soldiers. But again, you're not really then, in the aftermath of it, when I was in the army, most of these infantry soldiers were going into places like the West Bank and policing. So they were never going to see a soldier on the other side of their scope, right? And you would kind of do all of these drills and you would say fire so that they would shoot the gun. But that gets really boring. And so we would change the words, and then we would at first make it like words of like known terrorists, right? But like how many people, like how many names of that do we even know, And then people would say, like, I even said like Abbas, and then like sometimes people would say Arabs, and like kind of thinking about that over time. And I just remember one time saying, I think I said Abbas, and then...
and to our audience, when we say Abbas, it's for Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PA.
Yeah, the president of the PA.
I think the word president for him is a bit too much. I just say head of the PA. Trying to give him as less credibility as possible for the man.
Yeah, he's not a credible person, though. Yeah, but still, I remember thinking like, but then I ran out of words. So I just said, and I was like with one soldier. I wasn't like, I was with one soldier training him. And then I said Mickey Mouse, and he didn't fire. He turned to me and was like, you want to shoot Mickey Mouse? And I was like, do I want to shoot Abbas? Like, do I want to shoot Abbas? Like, now, he's not exactly someone that, at the time, I really had no idea. Obviously, today, I know the Palestinian Authority is super corrupt and, like, it's not exactly the person that I most respect, but I also don't want to shoot him, And I just remember, like, there was something to me about the fact that soldier totally stopped on Mickey Mouse, and no soldier ever before stopped on any of the other names we said, including just Arab.
That's what I'm curious, because I have to stop at this point for a second, just because, there's this one statement that we always, when I have conversations with Israelis, it's the whole, they always use the card of I've had so many soldiers, Bedouins, Druze. We are all fine together. Even though I know from others that there's so much racism within the army, like you cannot just come in and we're all the same. Like it doesn't work like that. This racism will still be in there. So like, was there no Druze, no Arab, no Bedouin, no Christian who paused once? I'm surprised.
I think there were probably Druze because some of them like would be just within the other, like the ranks and units. But most of the Bedouin and Druze soldiers that I worked with were in their own separate units. Like there's a Druze unit and there's a Bedouin unit, right? They're like the Bedouin unit's like trackers.
Yeah, they're mainly the trackers.
Obviously there probably were a few who were integrated, but like I think the level of casual racism is so high that those people aren't really being considered. And I imagine that they either also believe it or they're filtering themselves out. Like
to be scared.
Yeah, they're probably scared.
What if your name is Abbas?
To be honest,
Abbas is not an uncommon name.
No, it's not an uncommon name.
Or Osama is not an uncommon name.
To be honest, this is the first time I'm even thinking about it. Like it
just came up to me. I'm
it's not nice for me to even admit that, but like it's like, yeah, every so often there was like an Arab, like a Muslim or a Christian or a Druze soldier. But like, obviously, like if you're working with the unit, probably those things weren't being said at the same level. But like, it's also like really complex. Like then you know, like the Druze units were like really like into the military. Yeah. And I think like we all thought that the Bedouin units doing tracking was like really cool. And like, I don't really know. I mean, like there's also a lot of like, there were also male soldiers who were shooting instructors, but a lot of women soldiers. So there's also a lot of element of like flirtation and like, you know, stuff like that. And so there's a lot of just trying to kind of like casually impress each other and be funny, you know, like people would say Arabs to kind of be like funny. And like, obviously I don't think it's funny now. And I think even at the time I realized like it's messed up, though I did participate in it. But so it's like military culture it's misogynistic, it's racist, like it's gross, you know? And I think like when you're working with combat soldiers constantly, you really see it. And you also I just remember seeing it a lot where a lot of the soldiers I would work with, it was before they were deployed, like they were in their training. But then you would also work with soldiers who were like in commander's course or officer's school or doing like a refresher course, right? And so it was like the officer's school aside, because they were like, we're going to be officers. We're really like, you know,
in
proper.
The army.
Yeah, they were like really like,
as they say in the army here, like yellow.
Yeah, they were yellow.
Very into it.
They were into it, and they were into like discipline, and like, you know, they were becoming officers. Like, but everyone else, it was like the longer you were in the army, and at that point, you know, you're probably going back and forth between the West Bank and different places, you're doing messed up stuff, the worse the culture got. Like the people who I would, you know, like the soldiers that I would work with in the beginning of their time were like relatively respectful towards us. And like towards the end, like the level of misogyny would be so much higher. And so that, you know, so I think also the level, and so I think also like the level of racism like also gets a lot worse, because again, like how can you go into someone's house? How can you like go into someone's house, wake up a family, like put your guns on people, kids, you know, see them like piss in their pants and then
not blink.
Yeah, like the only way that you can do it is you're normalizing it, is that you believe this dehumanization makes sense, which is exactly how we've gotten to the point where we are today, you know? So I think I just had moments where I kind of pulled myself out of that and was able to kind of look and say, like, this isn't who I want to be. Like, I don't feel good about this. But I do remember trying to talk about it with other people, and it got shut down very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I really went inside of myself during most of my military service. And then at the very end of my service was the flotilla in the Marmara in 2010. And and that already, I mean, I really was like a month or two before getting out. And I just remember reading about what happened and the people who were killed. And I remember talking about it in the army, and everyone was just giving these like Hasbara talking points. And I was like, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense. Like, we are such a well-skilled army. There is no way we had to go on that soldiers had to go on the boat, like some of the best soldiers that Israel claims to have, and kill people who were unarmed. It just doesn't make sense. And I just remember for the first time, everything that people said, I agreed, like I kind of like nodded my head in agreement to an extent, because like I was still in the army and these were the people I was talking to, and there wasn't exactly, it didn't feel like there was an escape at that moment. But I remember in my head being like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. Like, you're just okaying something that's not okay, So I think there was just like pockets and like moments like that.
There's never one moment that makes you like change. It's always a build up to something. Sometimes like the last straw might be something super simple, but everything that led up to it, not to saying that the Marmara incident was a super simple thing, but like sometimes it's like more like we say like the straw that breaks the camel's back is a straw.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a haystack.
It's not a haystack.
Yeah. But I think what I wanted to say, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Like I assume that many people that do fucked up shit sometimes might stop, and maybe like years later they're in a bar or in a cafe and it's like, yo, that was fucked up. We were a part of that. We did that. How's that? You take it to 10 step further, where you not only maybe recently, the past 2 years, correct me if I'm wrong, have started doing it publicly on social media. But not only that, also, like, you don't only talk about your journey, you help people get on that journey as well. So I'd love to hear from you. Like you said, that you speak to Israelis, you speak to maybe Jewish diaspora, in order to, like you spoke about Hasbara, kind of like reverse Hasbara, or a different kind, an alternative Hasbara. A human Hasbara, kind of.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know if you can like take me to a classroom where you're sitting and you're talking to these students.
Yeah.
What are the things that come up? Like, I can throw a few things if you want, but like the things that come to mind is like the most moral army in the world. There is no occupation. Things like we're the only democracy in the Middle East.
All Arabs are terrorists.
Yeah, or like a good Arab is a
good
dead
Arab is a dead
Arab.
Arab.
These children will grow up to be terrorists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, actually, let's start, because I hear this talking point a lot, which is quoting Golda Meir, the only female prime minister of Israel, that said, there will be peace when the Palestinians love their children more than they hate us.
Yeah.
Does she say Arabs or Palestinians?
Arabs.
That is, even if people don't communicate it, it is expressed that Palestinians worship death.
Yeah.
Or Arabs worship death. So I said a lot of things, but I'd love to like just the ball's in your court.
Yeah, no. So this is a lot of what I do today. Like, and maybe I'll just say really quick. Basically, like the past 15 years or so, or has just been a process then of me coming out of that and basically saying like, I have two main goals now. One, which is like to actively organize on the ground against the occupation, like sit in front of bulldozers and get people signed up to protective presence and like increase all of that. And the other one is to educate on the occupation, so as to get more, because I think like in order to get more people on the ground, we need, like, there needs to at least, I don't think education in and of itself is enough.
But without understanding, how can somebody take action?
Right. It's like, you're asking for people to put themselves into danger, which if they don't see why, if they're not educated to see why they should do it, then they probably won't be motivated to do it. And yeah, so for the past like 2 years, obviously I have this Instagram called Becca Explains Occupation. I started it not too long after October 7th, but already before that, I spent 7 years as a member of like working at Breaking the Silence. And for a while I was the head of the education department, and I gave a lot of tours to Israelis.
Can you say what Breaking the Silence is?
Yeah, Breaking the Silence is a group of soldiers who served in occupied territories, so Gaza, East Jerusalem, or the West Bank, or I should say the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. who basically then have given testimony on what it means to uphold the occupation daily during times of heightened conflict, during times of regular conflict, and basically to show that the inherently controlling Palestinians indefinitely cannot be moral. It is an inherent immoral action that requires us to take away Palestinian rights, to bring collective harm to Palestinians, and that it's not actually just like work of defense, basically, that soldiers are doing. And so I've worked with a lot of Israelis, of course, during that time. I think like, so something like the Golda Meir statement is something that I hear all the time, which is basically an assumption. And this I usually will say to people. So we're basically assuming that the desire to harm Jewish Israelis is higher than the desire to love our own, like love our own children, or for Palestinians to love their own children. And I basically say I don't think that makes sense. And I think that what we're really saying is we're taking away from ourselves any ability to look in the mirror by just completely putting it on Palestinians. Or as Golda Meir doesn't even recognize Palestinians as a people, right? So like we're already kind of dehumanized by saying these people who identify in a certain way don't, right? And we're basically removing ourselves and any responsibility for our actions, right? And I talk a lot about this. Like if you...
From a 17-year-old
perspective,
Israeli kid right now from the Tveria.
Yeah.
And you're coming to my school and I'm telling you this. What do you tell me?
So I'll probably say something along the lines of like, look, first of all, I think it's like a pretty big... Do you think that people love their children? Do you think people love their children?
Yeah.
Do you think your parents love you?
Absolutely.
Do you think there's a genuine reason why Palestinians would love their children less?
If I want to be the devil's advocate now and be super racist on our own podcast.
You're the 17-year-old from
Wow, that's going to be really bad.
I mean, you do you give these kinds of sessions
I do, but not, I definitely, and I'll tell you what, but
you don't have
for the sake of argument, I'll tell you, yes, the reason why is because their religion tells them to kill to kill, and that's the highest praise.
So I'm going to like pause for a second and say, even though obviously you're not the kid from Tiberias, the level in which you feel uncomfortable when you then push 17-year-olds to explain what they're saying, explain like that line that you're constantly saying, they also start to feel really uncomfortable because no one really asks people to explain what they mean, right? Like we're all going based on assumptions, right? And I'll say, okay, but I know a lot of people from the West Bank, and they have houses, and the army on their private land, right? And the army refuses to give them building permits for it. And they spend their whole lives doing everything they can in order to make sure that their children are sheltered. So I personally know someone, right, who my friend Hamdan, he does everything he can to keep his children safe, right? And he's a practicing Muslim, yeah? Tell me how he loves his children less.
Oh, he's a minority. The majority are not. That's the answers.
He's a minority. The majority are not.
Because I get those statements all the time, so I know what this is.
So how many Palestinians have you sat with that you know that it's the majority?
Oh, no, I don't know. I see them on TV.
So you see them on TV. So have you actually gone into, you don't even have to go into the West Bank. Have you gone to just, other communities within Israel, or into the West Bank, or into other places, and actually sat down and talked to children and see how loved they feel? Have you actually talked to parents and trying to see if there's a difference?
I mean, if I'm going to think what they're going to answer, because they're really, like, some people can be very bigots. No, but I know that this, like, it's a thing that has become now. I think it's like a thing that our audience, it's a good, like a pointer, that there is this now usage of, I'm telling you, like kind of like, and you see that, like, I've seen it on recently with a video that we talked about, like a conversation about something in the values of Judaism.
Right.
And one person is like telling him, the Torah says that we need to kill the, what was it?
Amalek?
Amalek. And it's from my friend Yirmiyahu. He does interviews with Palestinians. He does interviews with Israelis, and he talks to this one Israeli guy, and the guy tells him, no, like in the Torah, they says to kill the Amalek and the what do you call it? Not Flishtim, the Ishmaelites.
Okay.
So it's like, and he's like,
which means Arab,
which
basically.
means essentially Arabs, like the sons of Ishmael and the Amalek. And he's like, no, it doesn't say that in the Torah. He's like, no, I'm telling you, it's there. Like that's the kind of answers that we get today. Is like, and I get those. No, I'm telling you. They're like that. I'm like,
so I think one of the things that I always try and remember, if I'm talking to like a group of 17-year-olds, right, is first of all, you have that one person asking you questions, and maybe he's being genuine, maybe he's being a troll, right? But you have everyone else in the room that doesn't have to be defensive about their answers, and they're just listening. Mm-hmm. And so for a lot of those people, I think a lot of times it's like, wait a minute, it gives an opportunity to not be as sure. A lot of times when it's things like all Palestinians, I feel sad about Palestinian children, but they grow up to be terrorists, right? And then you kind of like, okay, but like you could then say, if you're like a child living in Gaza right now, you can say, I feel bad for Israeli children, but they all grow up to be soldiers who come into Gaza and kill us, right? Like what, like it's such a zero-sum way of thinking. And so a lot of times I just try and like reflect back of like, the holes in this idea that tends to be these assumptions are so total, right? Like, and the reality is that in most of Israeli society, and you don't have to go to, like Tiberias is one of those examples where it's like it's periphery and like it's a place that's known to be very right wing. You really don't have to go to Tiberias.
That's why I said Tiberias.
Right, but like you really don't have to go to Tiberias to get there, right? Like
exactly, you can go to Tel Aviv.
Exactly, you can go to Tel Aviv, you can go to the kibbutzes, like and like get the same type of thinking.
And have
100%, right?
More centrist views and
basically what I try and do is like get them to two things, like let's expand our thinking. Like maybe it's possible that there's conflict because there's violence, right? Like I know personally as someone who was in the military that I went and it was my responsibility for a moment to tell, to make it so these Palestinians couldn't access their land, right? Would that make you angry if every single day someone was coming and telling you you can't access the way that you make money for your family, for your kids, right? That would probably make you angry at some point, right? And when you have a bunch of examples like this, of course there's going to be interactions of violence, right? Mm-hmm. Even before we get to kind of like the clear power dynamics that like, Israel has an occupation over Palestinians. Palestinians do not have military control over Israelis, right? But basically just trying to kind of expand a little bit, like what do we actually know? And also, and this is especially true when you're talking with people who don't necessarily want to listen to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah.
Like sometimes I have conversations with people who like are down to like listen and learn and want information and, and sometimes you're talking to people who don't. Especially like high schoolers and especially like pre-military academies and all of these type of groups, who like meet a leftist for the first time and just want to like curse them out,
Take out their notebook, all the talking
You're a
points.
Traitor, get out of here.
All the talking points that they've memorized, I get that. We gave a few workshops where we talked about like dialogue. It wasn't specific to like anybody that grew up with indoctrination or anybody that grew up with misinformation, but somebody that is going to talk about someone that disagrees with them. And we talk about like meeting people where they are, understanding like the degree of like shifting someone from the extreme end of the spectrum, which is an absolute disagree, a disagree, a maybe, and an agree. And that every single time, the best you're going to get out of somebody is one up or one back. Very rarely do you bring somebody from a no or from a no to a yes.
Right.
Like you have to move them levels. And also like active listening, like it's all a process. My second question before we move to the needs segment, I'd love to know if we're not talking about children, if we're not talking about kids, if we're talking about because like the
You can
military,
humanize kids easier, you're saying?
yeah, it's also more like a sponge, like Play-Doh. Like you might like, even though they'll go back to their parents or to their school or whatever, and like there needs a lot of work to do, but like a kid can be distracted easily. A kid can be like, or be extremely, extremely stubborn. When it comes to more like adults, like when they go through life, they're more like firm. The mold has already been made. So I'd like you to, because like I'm sure our audience notices the shift from season 1 to season 2, where season 1 was more like focusing on us embodying a way of dialogue and hosting mostly Jewish Israeli guests that mostly had opposing views to ours. So we wanted to embody kind of like a conversation of us as Palestinians and Israelis can sit in a room. And the second season, we're kind of more focusing on talking to Palestinians and letting the audience have their turn in listening and actually having that dialogue amongst themselves. But now since we have you, and I think the work that you're doing is so extremely crucial because you can explain the occupation more than sometimes better than Palestinians that actually experience it because of how fragmented it is. Like every single location in the West Bank, Israel proper, Gaza has a specific protocol kind of that you really need like a thesis in it to really understand how to explain it to someone who denies it. And for a Palestinian to not only be oppressed, but educate themselves about the intricacies of their own oppression and then explain it to their oppressor is like kind of like asking us to meet you, like asking for you to stay where you are and us to get there, not even meeting halfway. So I really appreciate the work that you do. If you can be so kind to explain, like, why is it an occupation?
Yeah.
Because of how something that we tackle here and in general, some of our audience tackle around the world. The statement of, or trying to convey that, oh, no, there's no such thing as an occupation. Yeah. So what's an occupation?
Yeah. I'm going to go further. I'm going to explain 3 concepts because I think that we at this point in the conversation in 2025, we can't have one without the other. First is occupation, the second is apartheid, and the third is the continuing Nakba. So because I think like, especially when you're looking at the conversation online, a lot of people talk about occupation being like all between the river to the sea, right? And kind of like referring to as colonialism. I'm going to put that to the side for a second and focus on like the legal, like what is an occupation, right? And an occupation is when a country militarily controls an area of land, a swath of land, and the people within it. They are under military rule, and it is temporary. That is like the legal definition of an occupation in international law, right? So Israel's law of the land in places like the West Bank is a military rule, right? The law of the land in the West Bank is that of the Israeli military, not that of the Israeli Knesset, right? It's not a democratic structure there. There are not laws in the West Bank. I think that people don't realize that. Like, the West Bank does not have laws. It has military orders that started in 1967, and a military order is inherently temporary. A military order can be a few hours, it can be a few days, it can be a week, it can be a year, and then at some point it's renewed, right? And so these military orders basically decide the reality of Palestinian lives, but not just the individual, like the whole entire system. So just to give an example, in 1967, Israel basically occupies the West Bank, right? And the Gaza Strip and the Golan
Jerusalem.
Heights. And well,
it was also under Jordanian rule.
Israel occupies the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, right?
Oh, because they separated it later with annexation of East Jerusalem.
Israel separates it.
Annexation of East Jerusalem versus the West Bank.
Right, but the international community still views East Jerusalem just as occupied as any other part of the West Bank, right? And I think it's really important to mention that because we'll talk about this a bit more in a second, but this whole idea of divide and conquer of Palestinian identity that Israel puts on us, right? That East Jerusalem Palestinians are inherently different than West Bank Palestinians, that are inherently different than Palestinian citizens of Israel, than those in Gaza, than those in the diaspora, right? May they be refugees or not. But in 1967, Israel occupies all of this land. And at first, it more or less looked the same. And then over time, those divisions started. But when it starts occupying, it has military rule. And so it creates military law. So like the third, I think it is, the third military order ever sets up the military courts for Palestinians, right? That basically says if you're a Palestinian and the Israeli military arrests you, this is what the court system looks like. This is what the legal process looks like, right? I won't call it a justice system, but like this is what it means to be a Palestinian who's now sitting in front of a judge. It's a military judge with a military prosecutor, with a soldier who arrested you, right? All of that is set up by a military order.
Regardless of age, gender, like all of it.
Regardless of anything.
Location.
Right? The 101st military order that's ever set up is called it's literally called Military Order 101. And Military Order 101 prevents more than 10 or more Palestinians from gathering and even having a political conversation. Right? So it basically makes protest illegal, but also things like student political bodies, or even just like political gatherings talking about political issues. May they be relevant to the occupation or not?
Which justifies raids on universities and capturing students and calling them terrorists and organizations.
And even today, when there is a nonviolent protest happening, there's no right to it. And there's no, so the army's not like, okay, this protest is happening. You have to protect this protest as it's happening, which is up until recently more or less what happened in Israel, at least towards Jewish Israelis. Obviously, with Palestinian citizens of Israel, it's not quite been that. Though now we're seeing the Israeli police also not really protect protests, but break up protests. But like the job of the police in Israel for public protests is to allow the protest to happen. That is inherently untrue in the West Bank. In the West Bank, it's not called a protest. It's called a disturbance of order. And so the military breaks it up to restore order, right? Meaning you have no rights. And the way that I often describe it to Jewish Americans, and I think that Jewish Americans actually can understand this much easier than Israelis because Jewish Americans are a minority within a bigger system, and civil rights are clearly very important to the flourishing of Jewish Americans and our safety, which is now really being like ruptured very quickly, is the Bill of Rights, right? Like the right to free speech, that does not exist. There's a military order preventing that, right? The right to bear arms, it's like kind of a goofy one, but Israeli civilians, settlers in the West Bank, there's 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. There's 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And those Israeli settlers can bear arms, right? No Palestinian can bear arms in the West Bank, with the very, very, very specific exception of the Palestinian Authority police in Area A, right? Yeah. But like no civilian has a right to bear arms. But their Israeli counterparts living hundreds of meters away from them can, right? The right to not have your house be taken over by the military. That is not a right that Palestinians have. In fact, there's a name for it. It's called straw widow. Like not because your family did something, but because your family has a good view down below of the area that the army is raiding, right? Like these are all rights that that Palestinians don't have. And actually, when you think about the U.S. Constitution, it was literally basically based off of British. It wasn't exactly British occupation, and obviously, like the colonies in America were not the same as like the colonization that towards indigenous people in the United States, Turtle Island. But still, the rule, like the Constitution, was based off of this concept of a military shouldn't be able to control my daily life. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what happens in occupied territory, right? And then you'll have a lot of people say, oh, but you have the Palestinian Authority, right? And Oslo, which was signed in the 1990s, was a process between Israel and what became the Palestinian Authority. It like creates this body that's the first time there's Palestinian representation that's recognized by Israel, by the international community. But it doesn't end the occupation. The law of the land today, in the end of the day, is still the Israeli military. If the Israeli military wants to go into Jenin, the Israeli military will go into Jenin. It doesn't matter that there's Palestinian Authority functions there. It doesn't matter that there's Palestinian police there. If the Israeli military wants to do something, they'll do it. So the Palestinian Authority doesn't have authority over the Israeli military. It is still the sovereign. And I think what's really important, and to me, I think this was one of the things that made me so committed to Palestinian liberation, is just realizing that if you are a Palestinian in Jenin, no one is going to protect you, right? Like, the Palestinian Authority has authority to arrest Palestinians in the West Bank, in Area A specifically, but in the West Bank. The Area A is the area that Palestinian Authority has authority over, right? But if there's settler violence coming into Nablus or Ramallah, right, or there's military violence coming into those areas, the Palestinian Authority doesn't have the authority to defend the Palestinians living there, right? And even the people within those areas don't have the right to defend themselves. Like, they have it in international law, but they don't have it practically. And a lot of times I ask myself, like, the danger and the horrors that we're seeing of basically indefinite occupation, like it has no end date, is this reality that we've just set up a world in which Palestinians do not have the right to defend themselves. And I think that's an incredibly dangerous world for any of us to live in. Because if one group of people doesn't have the right to self-defense, no one has the right to self-defense. No one has the right to dignity. No one has the right to life. So that's an occupation. Like, there is military control over areas like the West Bank.
So
The second one?
Because the second one is a bit more challenging in terms of apartheid, because it's also done in the same way where they look at the whole land.
Right. No, I think we should look.
And then there's like, oh, what do you mean? You're a Palestinian citizen of Israel? You don't have apartheid here. Like that game of like,
right.
So let's put it into perspective. What does that mean?
I think we can put it, in my opinion, we can put it to rest. There's no question that there's apartheid in the West Bank. You have Palestinians who are under Israeli military law. You have Israeli civilians in the West Bank, settlers who are under Israeli civil law. They're literally under two different laws. And the definition of apartheid by the Rome Statutes of 2002 is being differentiated under different laws and privileging one of those groups based on any categories such as gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, stuff like that, right? Another great example in the world of where there's apartheid today is Afghanistan. There is gender apartheid, right? Like, men can legally do things that women cannot do. Men have legal privileges just because they are men, right? In the West Bank, no question. A Palestinian in the Palestinian village of Susia lives under military law, and a Israeli who lives in the settlement of Susia lives under Israeli law, and all of their rights, their legal rights, are different and based on that. But I think that we should expand, and this is what groups like B'Tselem have done and Human Rights Watch have done, to look from the whole river to the sea. So then we're talking about Israel, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, right? And if you look from all of those areas, and first of all, there's 7 million Jewish Israelis, more or less, like on average, from the river to the sea, and there are 7 million Palestinians, right? All 7 million Jewish Israelis have political rights, have civil rights, and have human rights, right? I'm not saying that those rights are never disrespected or crushed or right? Like,
or that there isn't an internal hierarchy.
Right, or that there's not an internal hierarchy, but more or less legally, right? And then, of course, like, there's discrimination and there's violence, and obviously Jewish Israelis also are targeted by Palestinians, right? Like, both in the military and like terror attacks against civilians. Like, it exists, right? But in terms of the state, Jewish Israelis are all civilians and citizens, and it does not matter if you are born or if you live in Israel, East Jerusalem, or the West Bank. You have the same rights no matter what. You can cross freely between all of those places, right? 7 million people have the same political rights regardless of where they were born, yeah? There are two places where Israeli Jews, of course, can't go, which is Area A of the West Bank and Gaza. But those are decided by the state of Israel. And tomorrow, the state of Israel could decide the Israelis can go into Area A, right? And also, of course, settlers, while being violent, are constantly going into Area A and nothing happens to them the vast majority of the times. And then you have Palestinians, and you have 7 million Palestinians between the river to the sea, and where you are born completely dictates the right that you have, right? So people will often say, no, but within Israel proper, there's not apartheid because Palestinian citizens of Israel and Jewish Israeli citizens have the same rights, right? But That's the whole point, is that Israel wants us, like the state, I'm not talking about just like Israeli civilians or Israeli citizens. The state wants us to try and fragment these populations in order to say that there's not basically a racist
group.
Right, that there's not one group that has privilege over another group, right? And while on paper, maybe Palestinian citizens of Israel more or less have the same rights as Jewish Israelis, there are only 2 million of the 7 million Palestinians between the river to the sea, and in that sense are often kind of scapegoated as like, no, look at this guy, he's a doctor. Look at this guy, he's in the Israeli Knesset, right? But like, we're not just looking at this guy because this other guy can't be in the Israeli Knesset.
And if you want to look at the guy who's in the Knesset, like for instance, Ahmed Tibi's cousins and nephews were killed in Gaza.
Exactly. Right. And of course, then you have actual legal discrimination happening against this population, like happening against Palestinian citizens of Israel. Like, yes, every Palestinian of Israel theoretically can vote and has that same right that Jewish Israelis have, but there have been all these laws and like measures that have been passed to limit Palestinian influence in the Knesset, like in 2015, raising the threshold from 2 seats to 4, or I think it was 2 to 4. Maybe it was 2 to 3. No, it was 2 to 4.
I'm drawing blank. Yeah, 4.
I think it was from 2 to 4 to make it basically impossible for small political parties like Balad, right, to pass the threshold, right? And so it's like, but the Palestinian voice is not as strong in the Knesset because of that, right? Yeah. But then you go to, but fine, yes, Palestinian citizens of Israel can move freely between Israel and the West Bank relatively and East Jerusalem. And then you go to East Jerusalem and you know, Israel already from the 1960s, but in the 1980s officially annexed like this piece of land, but didn't take the civilians with it.
Yeah, took the land, not the people.
Took the land, not the people, right? And so like Palestinians in East Jerusalem like have permanent residency instead of citizenship, and like can't vote,
pay full taxes, yeah.
And don't get the benefits of what those services really bring, right? Like theoretically have more civil rights than Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, theoretically and practically, but don't have the same as Jewish Israelis.
What's the last point that you talked about?
Continuous Nakba.
The continuous Nakba. I feel like it ties to it.
It does. Like, it all ties together. That kind of like, so basically like between the river to the sea, like then obviously West Bank Palestinians have even less rights. And then the West Bank and Gaza are considered 2 completely different political entities, where Palestinians in Gaza are just stuck in Gaza, right? They can't even move freely today between the West Bank and Gaza. And so you have limited political rights for Palestinians and full political rights for Jewish Israelis. Again, obviously there's discrimination within that as well, but on the basic legal level. And this ties into the continuing Nakba. Well, that's why I would say there's apartheid between the river to the sea first and foremost, because it has these kind of like stratas, right? Like it has these different levels. Palestinian citizens of Israel on paper having the same rights as Jewish Israelis doesn't inherently mean that there's not apartheid between the river to the sea, because no one's actually separating at this point between Israel and occupied territories. There is one state with legitimate use of violence, like with a monopoly on violence. It is Israel
that functions on Jewish supremacy.
That functions throughout the land, and a big part of its purpose is to maintain Jewish privilege or like Jewish political self-determination and deny it to Palestinians, right? And so and that's where it kind of also connects not just apartheid, but to this concept of the continuing Nakba. Obviously, the Nakba was the expulsion of Palestinians in 1948. And a lot of people say, oh, they left by choice. It doesn't really matter.
Or lost the war.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like, you should be able to go back to where, even if you fled the war, like you should be able to go back to your home that you own, that your community is from. And the fact that it's so scary to Jewish Israelis show how much this really is a demographic kind of like, has become a demographic or has been a demographic issue. Has been, not has become, has been a demographic issue, where today you have equal numbers. And so there's this political fragmentation. But back in 1948, it was not allowing people to, kicking people out and then not allowing people to come home that created this kind of Jewish majority. While also
placing the Israeli law of 1970 for abandoned properties and a lot of things within the within the system in order to make sure that Palestinians can't get their land back or can't go back or can't take ownership over their own homes, and how the system functions against it. And as you said, before, it's if we want to put it into perspective, just within an example, we can look at the village of Barta. That we have a guest on our podcast this season from there. If we want to say, okay, this is Nazareth is all the way here and Ramallah is all the way there, fine. Barta is one town, literally split in the middle. If you live here, you have Israeli rule of law, and if you live literally across the road, your cousin will be under Palestinian law.
Under military
law within and he's looked at as a Palestinian in the West Bank, and looked at as an Israeli citizen, and completely different realities.
Right. But like
on the same land in 100 meters.
Yep. And coming from like the same community and
cousins. Like I'm actually like talk about like, or even siblings.
Yeah.
You moved here and they moved there. Different rights.
And so I think kind of like it is important, like there's this desire a lot of times to not talk about the Nakba, but like that there is this, that we do have to talk about it, because so much of what's happening right now is based on this basically demographic fights, right? And so it splits between the current demographics and then also the demographics of the fact that there was a whole entire population that was here that today are refugees. And so much goes back to ensuring that those refugees can't go back home, and the zero sum of it all, right? Like either we can be safe or you can be safe. Either we can have dignity or you can have dignity. Either we can live in the place we call our homeland, or you can live in the place you call your homeland, right? And I think that like breaking through this zero sum is the only way forward. Right?
Liberty and security go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think also, for a long time I lived on a kibbutz called Bar'am, and it sits on the ruins of Birim, which is a Palestinian village that was kicked out, like actually towards the end of the Nakba. And like I often say, like I don't think Bar'am is going to go anywhere, right? Like I don't think the solution is to just kick Bar'am, like the people of Bar'am, out of their homes. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to prevent the people of Biram from recognizing their right of return, right? And I think it's really like, it's a really, really hard thing for people to hear. But if we want to actually get to like the heart of the conflict, we have to let go of this zero-sum reality. And letting go of this zero-sum reality means recognizing that like there are two peoples here, and
one's going anywhere.
No, not only with violence, one group could go somewhere, right? But that's not I really hope that that's not the goal that we have. That's exactly what we're fighting against. And
I think we can talk about like the details of the occupation and how this entire systems work. Like just to quote you, is that it's not a complicated situation. It's very clear what's happening, but it is a complex system, and there's a reason for it to be complicated. And because we're short on time, I think we should just jump into the needs, because I really want our audience to have like a direct call to action from you as an educator.
Yeah.
So in this last segment, we want to ask you, how can we help? What are your needs? From us as your Palestinian counterparts, friends, I hope. And from our audience, from the Israeli community, from the Palestinian community, from anyone who's listening.
So I think that the needs right now are twofold, and I'll say that like we have the immediate needs on the ground. Like there's real campaigns of ethnic cleansing happening. Obviously, like we're in early October. We're like waiting to hear if there's going to be a ceasefire, but that's only really talking about Gaza. And a lot of the communities that I've been working with for the past decade or so in places like Masafer Yatta and other places in Area C of the West Bank, which is under full Israeli military control, the PA doesn't function there, are under very serious campaigns of ethnic cleansing right now. And this agreement doesn't refer to that, and I don't think there's a reason to believe that any agreement would just stop that in its tracks. And so we really need people to come and be involved. And we also need monetary support because we can organize the organizers on the ground that include a lot of really, really talented people, of Israelis and internationals who are going back and forth from Israel to the West Bank, or who are even going and living in the West Bank, are doing a phenomenal job of basically providing protective presence to these Palestinian communities in partnership, of course, and led by these communities themselves. It's Palestinian-led. But things, even if they're well organized, they cost, it's resources. It costs money, like having a tank of gas to be able to, send cars over to the West Bank, or to be able to rent a Jeep to go onto these dirt roads that we need to be able to access. These things are really, really important. And so my call to action is to support the organizations working on this and the movement building that is doing this work right now. And if you can, come and be a part of it. Some of the groups that are working on it is the Center for Jewish Nonviolence is one that I work a lot with and really appreciate. And they basically organize protective presence of the Jewish diaspora. You can donate to them. You can donate to the Israeli group Ta'ayush, who organize protective presence every single week. You can donate to the group Rabbis for Human Rights, who organizes the olive harvest that's about to happen. And then it will mean that they'll have more capacity to bring more people over to more villages to help with the harvest. You don't need our bodies because we're amazing at picking olives. You need our bodies because the army and settlers are less likely to attack when we're there. And if they do attack, having us there as a buffer has potential to be helpful. And, I don't think any Palestinian should be beat up because they're Palestinian, and I'm happy to put myself in their place. But we need support for that. And then in terms of movement building, I will also say that I'm currently the director of an organization called Achvat Amim, which means Solidarity of Nations. And we bring mainly Jewish diaspora, though you don't have to be Jewish, you're welcome to sign up, to the land, to Jerusalem to do movement building. And that's the type of thing where you can come, you can both learn from so many of the people who've probably been on this podcast and others, Palestinians and Israelis, about direct action, about the future of this place, and then you can bring it home to help movement building in the US and England and other places, and support Israelis and Palestinians from afar. And also, of course, we're always looking for donations because doing this actual work on the ground costs money. And so if you can do either of those things, that's amazing. And if you can show up yourself, that is, of course, always really, really needed. And the last thing I just want to say is that if you're in a movement in the United States or anywhere else in the diaspora, England, Australia, Europe, anywhere in Europe, anywhere, actually talk to Israelis and Palestinians doing this work on the ground, and don't let this just become a discourse on an academic theory, because people's lives are actually at stake, and there's actual dispossession happening right now, and there's actual harm that happens to people, and it happens regardless of a lot of what's happening on the outside. And we really need your direct action on the outside to influence what's going to happen here. I say this as an Israeli. I'm not, ashamed of my identity. People and societies do not give up privilege on their own because they wake up one day and decide, oh, we're not going to be privileged anymore. We need support from the outside with some pressure so that we can make the right change.
And for the end, we just want to say thank you so much, Becca, for everything you're doing. It's truly admirable, the work that you're doing and the effort that you're putting into this to change the reality on the ground. And thank you, everyone, from our audience for listening to us. Keep continuing to follow us on all social media platforms and listening to the episodes on wherever you listen to your podcast. And tune in next time for another episode of UTTN, the podcast.